Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think everybody has thought about at some point. What makes something right or wrong?
Yeah.
It's a really, really fundamental
Yeah, it's a big one.
question. And we've got a fascinating conversation to kind of unpack today. It features these two friends, Ravi and Ajay, just hanging out in a park.
Just shooting the breeze.
Just shooting the breeze. And they get into this really, really deep topic.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great setup because it feels so natural and relatable, you know?
Yeah.
It's like how we all kind of get into these conversations.
Yeah.
Right away, Ravi kind of jumps in with the big question. He's like, how can something seem right to one person,
Oh, yeah.
but wrong to someone else?
Right off the bat.
Yeah, and to kind of illustrate this, Ajay brings up a really classic example. The starving person stealing bread.
Oh, yeah.
Like, legally,
Yeah.
it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
But morally...
It's not so black and white.
complicated.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Ajay's getting at, right? Those lines between legality and morality can get pretty blurry.
Yeah.
What's considered right and wrong, it can change so much, like depending on your personal beliefs, cultural norms, you know, all the context.
Yeah, the whole context of the situation.
Double context.
All right, I am hooked already. So where does their conversation go from there?
Well, Ajay decides to throw kind of a curveball, and he introduces this story about a sage who's known for always telling the truth.
Okay.
This guy, he's built his whole life around honesty.
Okay.
But then one day, these bandits come to his village, and another man hides from them in the sage's hut.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right.
Classic ethical dilemma time.
Exactly. So the bandits show up, and they're like, hey, have you seen this guy? And now the sage is in this predicament because if he tells the truth,
Yeah.
the man is caught.
Probably worse.
Yeah, who knows what will happen.
Yeah.
But if he lies, he's going against this core principle that he's like built his life on.
Yeah.
So talk about a rock in a hard place.
So how does he navigate that choice?
He ends up choosing compassion over this strict adherence to honesty.
Okay.
He lies to protect the man's life.
Interesting.
And this is a perfect example of what we call situational ethics.
Situational ethics. I've heard that term thrown around before, but to be honest, I could use a little refresher.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean in this context?
So it's basically the idea that sometimes doing the right thing isn't about just following the rules.
Okay.
Like sometimes it's about taking into account the circumstances, the potential consequences, you know, all that nuance that strict rules might miss.
Yeah. Yeah, like in this case, most people would probably agree that, saving a life is a greater good than strictly sticking to the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it raises a really interesting question, when is it acceptable to bend those rules?
Oh.
Where do we draw the line?
Right.
And Ajay uses this great analogy. He says morality isn't just black and white, it's all the shades in between.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not about finding that one-size-fits-all answer,
Exactly.
but understanding that things can be a lot more complex
Right.
than they appear.
Totally.
Okay. But how do we actually navigate those shades of gray?
Well, to kind of explore that a little bit more, Ravi and Ajay start looking at some examples from some pretty high-stakes fields like law and warfare.
Okay, that makes sense because I can imagine there's probably a lot of gray areas in those situations where,
Yeah.
the right thing to do isn't always super obvious.
Totally. They even bring up this hypothetical case about a doctor performing surgery without consent to save a patient's life.
Okay.
Legally, that's a huge risk.
Yeah.
But ethically, you could argue it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, you're kind of in a bind there.
Yeah.
It really highlights how the legal and the ethical considerations can sometimes clash.
Right.
What else do they talk about?
They also bring up this really compelling example from the Mahabharata, the story of Arjuna's dilemma.
Yeah.
So he's basically told that he has to fight against his own family because they're on the wrong side of this huge conflict,
Oh, wow.
fighting for injustice.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. So even in these systems, with these established rules, sometimes those rules are challenged by the complexities of the situation.
It makes you think about how subjective interpretations and context and even just personal values can all influence how we understand what's right and wrong.
Absolutely.
It seems like Ravi is having kind of a realization here, right? Like that this whole idea of right and wrong is a lot more fluid than he initially thought.
He's like, whoa.
Yeah.
This is a lot.
And he even starts to think that maybe just personal perspective is the most important factor.
Yeah.
But does Ajay agree? I'm guessing it can't be quite that simple.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're getting into some pretty deep philosophical territory here. If personal perspective is the main driver of morality, Does that mean we're all just making things up as we go along?
Well, Ajay doesn't go quite that far. He acknowledges that, yeah, individual viewpoints definitely matter. But he reminds Ravi that, we don't exist in a vacuum. There are these like larger frameworks, like societal norms, legal systems, and even our own competence that kind of help guide our understanding of right and wrong.
Right. So it's not just a total free-for-all. We're all kind of operating within these bigger systems that have, developed over time.
Yeah.
But that brings up another interesting point where does our conscience fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Is it something we're born with, or is it shaped by our experiences and, the world around us?
That is the question, right? Like the nature versus nurture debate, but for morality.
Yeah.
Some philosophers think we have this like innate sense of right and wrong, while others say, no, it's mainly a product of like how we're raised, our culture, the values that we're exposed to.
It's so interesting to think about like what the implications of either side would be. Because if we're born with a conscience, does that mean there's like some universal moral code that's hardwired into all of us? But if it's learned, how do we account for the fact that people from such different cultures can still arrive at similar moral conclusions?
Yeah, and there's like evidence to support both sides, like think about little kids. They often show a sense of fairness and empathy even before they can really grasp like complex moral concepts.
That's true. Yeah.
So that suggests that maybe there's something instinctive going on.
Yeah, because kids will get so upset if they see somebody being treated unfairly, even if it doesn't directly affect them,
Right.
So they have this understanding that that's just wrong.
Totally. But then again, we also see how like cultural norms and societal values can really influence our sense of right and wrong.
Totally.
Like what might be totally fine in one society might be completely taboo in another.
Yeah, which suggests that at least some of our morality is learned,
Right.
by our environment.
Exactly. It's fascinating to think about how these two forces might work together, right? Like our innate predispositions and then the things that shape us as we grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that actually reminds me of that example we talked about earlier, the whole starving person stealing bread thing.
Yeah.
I feel like the way we judge that act might be influenced by the societal context, too.
Totally. Like a society with a really strong social safety net where everybody's needs are met, they might be way less tolerant of theft, even in a desperate situation.
Right.
Because they see it as like violating this social contract.
Yeah.
Whereas a society struggling with poverty and inequality, they might look at it with a lot more leniency.
Yeah.
They understand the desperation.
Yeah.
So yeah, the social conditions and the values of a community can have a huge impact on how they see right and wrong.
So if we're constantly being like pulled and pushed by all these different factors, how can we as individuals develop a strong sense of right and wrong? Is there a way to kind of navigate all this without getting lost in all the gray areas?
Well, I think Ravi and Ajay would both agree that it comes down to being mindful and reflective. Like, we can't just rely on our gut reactions or blindly follow what everybody else is doing. We got to engage in some critical thinking.
Okay.
Weigh the different perspectives and really think about the potential consequences of our actions.
So it's about taking the time to actually think things through, not just going with our first impulse or what everyone else seems to be doing.
Exactly. And it's about being open to challenging our own assumptions.
Okay.
Like what seems so right to us might be wrong to someone else and vice versa.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we need to be okay with like the nuance and the complexity, except that there aren't always easy answers when it comes to morality.
Totally. And I think
Right.
that's what makes these conversations so important. The more we talk about this stuff, and think about it, the better we'll be at making those ethical decisions in our own lives.
So it sounds like this whole conversation is really encouraging us to kind of embrace the gray areas, move beyond these simple ideas of right and wrong. Would you say that's a fair takeaway?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And it's important to remember, too, that like our understanding of all this is constantly evolving. As we encounter new situations, new perspectives, what might have seemed like totally black and white at one point in our lives, might become a lot more nuanced as we learn and grow.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change.
Yay.
And I think that really applies to like our own moral compass as well.
Totally. As we learn and evolve, our values might shift, and things that once seemed so clear-cut might start to feel a lot more complex.
It's interesting that Ravi and Ajay are having this whole conversation in a park. There's something almost symbolic about that setting, wouldn't you say?
I see what you mean. Yeah, parks are often seen as like these peaceful places for contemplation, where people from all walks of life come together. It's almost like a microcosm of society itself.
Exactly. Like you've got all these different perspectives and values all intersecting in one place. And within that setting, you have these two friends just diving deep into this really profound conversation about the very nature of right and wrong.
It's a great reminder that these conversations can happen anywhere, anytime. We don't need a fancy setting or a panel of experts to grapple with these questions. It's something we can all explore in our daily lives, just in our interactions with others and even in our own quiet moments of reflection.
It's making me think about all the times I felt conflicted about what the right thing to do was, those moments where you're really trying to weigh different values and consider all the potential consequences. I bet our listener has been in those situations too.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. It's not just about abstract philosophical ideas. It's about how we actually live our lives and make choices in the real world.
So as we wrap up our exploration of this super complex topic, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away pondering?
I think the most important thing is to remember that navigating these ethical dilemmas, it really requires a thoughtful and compassionate approach. We need to recognize that there are often multiple perspectives, gray areas, and no easy answers.
It's about being okay with uncertainty, questioning our own assumptions, and engaging in this ongoing dialogue about these really important issues.
Well said, because at the end of the day, our understanding of right and wrong, it's a journey, not a destination.
And on that note, we'll leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question. What situation in your life has made you question those simple definitions of right and wrong? Think about it, explore it, and until next time, keep diving deep.